Ontology of Construction on Nihilism of Technology in Theories of Modern Architecture was written by Gabrielle Greer in 1994. Hartounian was born in Iran and moved to America in 1976, where he worked as an architect. He was a lecturer of architectural history and theory at Columbia University. In 2000 he moved to Australia, where he currently lives, and is a researcher and lecturer at the University of Canberra. Hartounian's research is mostly focused on a critical archaeology of modern architecture, specifically the tectonics, which is defined as the art and science of construction. The book was written in 1994, at a time well after the Industrial Revolution and the introduction of technology within architecture. Hartounian has researched how technology has affected architecture over the last 2 centuries, observing the pros and cons that it has brought to the field. The group of essays presented is Hartounian's first book. The central theme explores how technology has affected architecture in the last 200 years. He poses an age-old question which has been debated many times in the past without a satisfactory conclusion, drawing on a broad spectrum of works and theories of intellectuals ranging from philosophers to architects. Many examples focus on the works of Gottfried Semper, Mies van der Rohe, Adolf Loos, Le Corbusier, and Frank Lloyd Wright, to mention a few. His main arguments include how technology has affected architecture in terms of design and structure, as well as how tradition has been lost over the years after technology became a major component of architecture. He states in his book, "Of course no one can argue against the limitations of certain historical production techniques, but it is a grave simplification to attribute a one-to-one correspondence between the technological developments and architectonic transformation. We will see how this view would reduce architecture to the status of a mere industrial utensil." Fabrication is also a critical theme throughout this book, including the processes of making. Semper's 4 elements of architecture highlight the industrial arts most relevant to architecture to be ceramics, masonry, carpentry, and weaving. Although Hartounian states his case clearly and uses many examples to reinforce his arguments, we do not believe that his book has had a long-term influence on architecture. We feel that this question will always be a challenge to answer successfully, as technology is ever-changing, and this will continuously bring about new arguments as architecture becomes more or less intertwined with technology. Hartounian refers to the loss of classical language of architecture, but the lack of alternatives. Hartounian seems to have based his theories around the work of Gottfried Semper, who stated that techniques derived from other industries were amalgamated to form a theory of architecture. He refers to the new thinking of the time, which ruptured away from classical thought with a new concept of beauty and the concept of fabrication. From 1756 onwards, the engineer and the architect became separated, showing a separation between construction and design, as the mechanical and industrial gained value. He believes that modern architecture's main aim is to free itself of classical thought, and the classical thought derives from the body of rules and principles, which confirm with concepts of reason and divine relation. He claims that architectural elements start to lose their poetic meaning. He then presents us with his theory of montage, stating that it brings together fragmented pieces and disconnects the relation of the whole to the parts of the concept. The whole arises from the juxtaposition of fragments through the act of montage. There is an ontological bond between art and science. This is known as techne, which was later replaced by the word technology. Techne has a lot more dimension than technology, incorporating many more aspects to it. Tectonics, the making of architectonic elements such as walls, beams, etc., has led to a loss of ornamentation from classical architecture, focusing more on these elements as construction components and not ornamentation. The advance in technology has had limitations on the development of architecture. Hartounian raises a point made by Viollet-le-Duc in the 19th century, saying that the century had almost ended without developing a characteristic of its own. The evidence of the impact of technology on humanity is also visible on the Bauhaus School's logo, which in the year 1922 changed from this to this. The later logo changed from one with an understanding of human beings and their need for shelter to one where technology dominates over humanity. In Chapter 3, Hartounian is exploring a new means of production. He looks at the works of Adolf Loos and Le Corbusier's ideas of a new architecture. He tries to explore the conflict caused when tradition became overshadowed with modern architecture. He describes how as technology progresses and with the introduction of public transport, cities transformed the traditional homology between private and public spaces. The writer describes Lotus's ideas of the interior of a house conforming to the dweller's experiences and focusing less on the exterior design, allowing the inhabitants to personalize their space. Hartunian regards Van der Rohe's process as an attempt to deconstruct the architectonic elements of traditional architecture, integrating technology and culture, closing the gap between the subject and the object. In addition to this, he claims that Mies began to abstract all the conventional ideas of classical architecture, challenging the classical perceptions and needs of the wall, and later looking into columns. He claims that the column may still be regarded as an ornament, as was the case in the Renaissance, while walls are just used to partition in Van der Rohe's work. The book is a collection of 6 essays with a foreword written by Kenneth Frampton, a fellow architect and researcher in the field of tectonics. Hartunian uses the introduction to lay his main points out and clarify what topics he will be tackling in the book. The first chapter is about montage, where Hartunian explains the development that has happened to architecture in the last 2 centuries. The montage is a chapter on his own opinion and view on these recent events as opposed to the next chapters where he validates his theory. By using examples of many architects' works and philosophies, Hartunian is able to strengthen his argument. The 6th and last essay is structured as a conclusion. Bringing more evidence to his theory using numerous books and architects to back himself up in this chapter, Construction of the Not Yet Construed gives us a sense of what is yet to come. Hartunian is looking for what has happened but could also still happen in the future. 4 pages before the end, Hartunian draws to a conclusion, summing up his points of the book and closing his theory with final evidence and calling what has happened over the last 2 centuries a beginning. This is defined as a period in time that contains the undisclosed abundance of the unfamiliar and extraordinary, which means that it also contains strife with the familiar and ordinary. Hartunian draws onto many past architects and architect researchers' theories of the influence of technology. Drawing quotes and text from the books by the likes of Gottfried Semper and Le Corbusier, he is proving his theory and giving us evidence of other people's same beliefs. Hartunian uses several forms of methods to get his points across to the reader. The main form of this comes through as cause and effect. The author is explaining a long line of events that have interacted with one another to change the path of architecture. Techne has come from many directions and changing many fields of construction, affecting the way architects design their building and their style. There is some process to the writer's way of explaining his theory, with an order of facts and past theories all coming together to form a bigger one. By comparing and contrasting past architects' theories and buildings, he was able to validate his point and make it more convincing, since the effects he is comparing are facts in history. He also uses a lot of definitions to clarify his theory and thinking process, since at some stages in the book it becomes a little unclear. The question we would like to pose is, will we ever be able to determine whether technology has influenced architecture for the better or worse, and why? Although this answer may be ever-changing, we are eager to explore the theories from various points of view on this subject. Hartunian's book, although not long, is quite complicated and difficult to read. The language is unnecessarily flamboyant and very much distracts from some of the salient points he makes. He has presented this notion of montage, which is interesting in terms of its explanation of fragmentation of space and the way that construction has evolved in modern architecture due to tectonics. However, his writing at times seems contrived, with him taking the reader on a lengthy journey through a number of people's theories, which he uses to strengthen his own theory of montage. This may be due to the fact that it was his first book, written in a time when a number of contemporaries took the view that modern architecture was an unhappy abandon of the classical notions of architecture. Therefore, his theory of montage may be derived from him trying to set himself apart from others.